I'm Jim Knight, co-founder of the Instructional Coaching Group, and you're listening to Coaching Conversations, where I talk with coaching experts from around the world so that all of us can learn better ways to make an unmistakably positive impact on the people around us. I'm super excited to meet Kim Scott for the first time, although I feel like we've known each other for a long time. I want you to know you're like a little hero in our organization. So Emily Malatesta, who's our Chief Operating Officer, she read your book. Then she said, we all have to read this book. Then I took the course on Masterclass. Others
Mm-hmm.
took the course on your website. So you're a hero in our company. You've really moved us forward. So I want you to know we should have little pictures of you around the business because you've been such a big influence on us.
Well, thank you. It's such a pleasure to hear that. You know, when you write a book, it took me 4 years to write Radical Candor, and the whole time I was like, oh, I've written all these other books. They never got published. Am I wasting my time? So thank you.
Well, and I want to make it clear that you're the author of Radical Respect, Radical Candor, some other books as well.
Yes.
And you were a CEO coach at Dropbox, Qualtrics, Twitter, other tech companies. You worked at Apple, YouTube, and on and on and on, Google. And you co-founded Radical Candor in 2017. But your book is both books, but Radical Candor is so helpful in recognizing that being candid is not an either or thing, that either you're nice or you're direct, but you can be clear and kind at the same time. So I'm super grateful for that work.
Well, thank you. Something I struggled with a lot. So I'm glad that my struggles helped other people with their struggles.
Well, it's going to help me today too. I've still got I need a lot of help. So I'm looking, I'm getting a free coaching out of this podcast. Is what I got in
Absolutely.
mind. Okay.
Absolutely.
So what was the origin story? How did you go from all the work you were doing in organizations and especially tech organizations to end up being this? I mean, your book's got to be one of the top 10 business books in the last 25 years. How did that all happen?
Sort of partly by design, partly by accident. I mean, I would say that my whole business career was actually my plan to subsidize my novel writing habit. So even while I worked at Google, I was writing a novel. And I had written 2 others. So I had this, and they had all been rejected by publishers. So I had this big stack of rejected novels. And one of my mentors suggested that I write a book about management instead of a 4th novel, because he said, you know, the drama, all of the human elements that you're trying to get at in your novels, they're all present in management, but you'll really help people actually do something practical, and that'll be easier to sell. And turns out that was really good advice. So that was how it all happened.
Okay, so what's the status of the novels, though? They've been shelved, or is that still a possibility?
I still am begging publishers to take a look at them, but even though Radical Candor sold like more than 1 million copies, I can't get them published. But I'm writing a 4th novel now. I'm writing a utopian novel now, in which we work it all out.
Well, that's the novel for the times. That's for
Yes,
sure. We need
yeah.
that escapist fiction for sure.
Yes, we do.
You know, I had the good pleasure of working with Atul Gawande, who's my probably all-time favorite nonfiction writer. And
Yes.
we did a study on coaching for
Fiction writer, right? Novelist as well.
Has he written a novel?
I think so.
Well, that's what I was going to say, because when I met him, he said, what I really want to do is I want to write a novel. And he's written all these great nonfiction works. So I'll have to check that out. I didn't know that he'd written that. But and Ta-Nehisi Coates too, you know, he wrote all those great nonfiction books, and then he came up with his great work. So you're in a good tradition there, so for sure. I would say arguably one of the biggest, if not the biggest idea in your book is that you can be clear and kind. So could you say a little bit about that? I'm sure you've explained it to millions of people, but what's it mean to be clear and kind?
At the same time, yeah. Well, since I love writing, I'm going to answer you with a story instead of an abstraction, and then we'll talk about an abstraction. Because one of the things that I have found over and over and over again in my life is that when I'm not saying something to someone because I don't want to hurt their feelings or I don't want to offend them, I wind up being unkind to them. So being unclear, to be unclear is to be unkind. Clear is kind. And for me, the story that I always think about when I'm in the moment and I'm tempted not to say the thing and I need a push to get me over my reluctance to say the thing that needs to be said, is what happened. Probably one of the most painful moments in my career when I had hired this guy, and I really liked him a lot. He was smart, he was charming, he was funny. We'll call him Bob. And I liked Bob a lot. And because he would do things, we were at one of those manager offsites playing one of those endless get to know you games. And you could tell everybody was really stressed out. They would rather either be home with their family or working. Like they didn't want to be playing this game. And Bob was the guy who had the courage to raise his hand and to say, I can tell everybody's really stressed out. I've got an idea. It'll help us get to know each other and it'll be really fast. Whatever his idea was, if it was fast, we were down with it. Bob says, let's just go around the table and tell each other what candy our parents used when potty training us. Really weird, but really fast. Weirder yet, everybody on the team remembered Hershey Kisses right here. And then for the next 10 months, every time there was a tense moment in a meeting, Bob would pull out just the right piece of candy for the right person. Yeah, so Bob was kind of funny. He brought a little quirky, but he brought some levity to the office. Everybody loved working with Bob. There was just one problem with Bob. He was doing terrible work. I was so puzzled. I couldn't understand what was going on because he had this incredible resume, this great history of accomplishments. I learned much later that the problem was that Bob was smoking pot in the bathroom 3 times a day, which maybe explained all that candy he had all the time. Remember, this is a startup, that's how things roll. And, but I didn't know any of that at the time. All I knew is that Bob was handing stuff in to me with shame in his eyes. They were riddled with kind of creative, but riddled with sloppy mistakes. And I would say something to him along the lines of, "Oh, Bob, you're so smart. You're so awesome. Maybe you could make this just a little bit better," which, of course, I never did. And he never did. He kept doing the bad work. He wasn't getting what I was saying. So let's pause. Like, why did I say that to Bob? We kind of all know that's going to fail, and I should have known. But I think the reason why I was, trying to encourage Bob instead of being clear, was that I really liked him, and I really didn't want to hurt his feelings. That was part of what was going on. That's what I call in ruinous empathy. That was the ruinous empathy part of what was going on. But if I'm honest with myself, there was also something more insidious going on because Bob was popular and Bob was also quite sensitive. And there was part of me that was afraid if I told Bob in no uncertain terms that his work wasn't nearly good enough, that he would get upset, maybe even start to cry. And then everybody would think I was a big, what. So the part of me that was worried about my reputation as a leader, that was sort of the manipulative and what I call manipulative insincerity part. I was worried about my reputation, not Bob's feelings. At the
Right.
same time, I was also genuinely worried about, and two things can be true at the same time. I was also genuinely worried about Bob's feelings, and so I didn't say I was not clear. uh, and this went on for 10 months, and eventually the inevitable happened. And I realized that if I didn't fire Bob, I was going to lose all my best performers. Because not only had I been unfair to Bob not to tell him, I'd been unfair to the whole team. And they were frustrated. They were frustrated because their deliverables were late when Bob's deliverables were late. They weren't able to spend as much time on their work because they were having to spend so much time redoing Bob's work. And the people who were best at the job, they were going to quit. They were going to go work someplace where they could do their best work. So I realized I better sit down and have a conversation with Bob, a conversation that I should, frankly, have begun 10 months previously. And when I was finished explaining to him where things stood, he kind of pushed his chair back from the table. He looked me right in the eye and he said, "Why didn't you tell me?"
Mm-hmm.
And as that question was going around in my head with no good answer, he looked at me again and he said, "Why didn't anyone tell me? I thought you all cared about me."
Mm.
And now all of a sudden, I realized that by not telling Bob, thinking I was being so nice, I'm having to fire him as a result of it. Not so nice after all. But it was too late to save Bob. At this point, even Bob agreed he should go because his reputation on the team was just shot. All I could do in the moment was make myself a very solemn promise that I would never make that mistake again, and that I would do everything in my power to help other people avoid making that mistake because it was so painful. It was painful for me. It was much worse for Bob, obviously. It was bad for everyone on the team, and it was bad for getting results. It was bad, bad, bad. And yet, I tell this story without too much shame because we've all made this mistake.
Well, it's such a good story. And what's interesting is how you thought the kind thing to do was to be appreciative and
Yeah.
positive, but actually the kindest thing you could do was to be direct and clear about the situation.
Yes, yes. And I think expressing gratitude and appreciation is really important. Like radical candor should always begin first with soliciting feedback. Don't dish it out before you prove you can take it.
Right.
And then giving praise and giving more praise than criticism. But I was not really giving real praise. The kind of praise, oh, Bob, you're so smart, you're so what?
Right.
That's like a criticism delivery platform, or
Right.
the feedback sandwich kind of thing. It was kind of manipulatively insincere praise, not
Yeah.
kind
I
and
like that.
clear praise.
I like thinking about that as manipulative positivity or whatever I can't remember
Yeah,
your exact phrase, but that's a great phrase.
yeah,
Your subtitle, if I remember it correctly, is something like how to be a kick-ass boss without losing your humanity. And humanity
exactly.
is a big concept for you. So how
Yes.
does humanity play into this work? What's it mean to not
Yeah.
lose your humanity and how's that show up?
I think like a lot of people, I hate bureaucracy. When I
Right.
was working at Google, and I had kids, I had twins. My team bought me little onesies that with the words bureaucracy buster printed out on it. That was my thing. And to me, part of being a leader is about laying down any power or authority that you get and learning how to realize that you have a job to do. And and you cannot get the job done unless you build good relationships with each of the
Right.
people who work directly with you. And only if you have those good relationships are you going to be able to fulfill your responsibilities as a leader, which is to create a culture of feedback, primarily you soliciting feedback, but also you giving it. And feedback to me means both praise and criticism. You've got to build a great team in which everyone is taking a step in the direction of their dreams. And because you're creating this culture of feedback and this great team, you're going to get results together, achieve incredible results. And if you think you can do those things without real relationships, you're kidding yourself. And that's kind of, to me, why your humanity is at the core. And of course, you can't build great relationships with others if you don't have a good relationship with yourself, So you've got to do whatever it takes to stay centered. I mean, one of the exercises I really love to do with teams is to sit down and say, what are the things that each of you need to do to stay centered every week, every day, every week, every quarter, how much vacation, like, and different people need different things. And if we understand the different things that the people we work with need, then we're much more likely to build better relationships and create the conditions for them to do their best work.
Yeah, it's interesting, very interesting, how we can objectify the other person, which interferes with the opportunity for real communication.
Yeah.
Robert Sutton, in his book Good Boss, Bad Boss, he talks about when you get more power, you can lose compassion for the people that you work with.
Yes.
And I feel it goes the other way too, that people, when they move up in a hierarchical structure, the people that used to be their peers kind of objectify them. They like to call them the boss because
Yeah.
something happens there.
Yeah. Yeah. You become the a-hole when you become the boss.
Well, and it's that idea that it's not you that's the issue, it's the role you represent. But if you want to be able to move forward, what I take from your work is you can't lose the ability to see the world through the eyes of the people you work with. You have to understand them at a pretty deep level.
Yes. I mean, and I think it's also important as you grow in your career to realize, first of all, part of what's happening is that because you're the leader, you're getting objectified. Like, people are gonna
Right.
make assumptions about you. And again, two things can be true at the same time. And you are more likely to act like a jerk when you
Right.
become the leader, because flattery comes at you like a thick and dangerous fog. And people are less likely to tell you when you're making mistakes, which is why I say, to create a culture of radical candor, it all starts with soliciting feedback.
Yeah, that's great. I have the pleasure of working in a lot of schools, and I've written some books, and so when I come to the meeting, everybody listens carefully, and then I come back to our company. We have a team meeting, and like nobody, "Hey, you're supposed to really listen to me and let me." It's like they treat me like a real person. It's a whole different. You get seduced into not even maybe realizing that you're being treated differently than other people because of that role, and that
Yeah.
that that can be really, really a danger. I'm
Yeah.
wondering, do you think it depends? Is it different the way I'm candid if I'm the leader when I talk to people who report to me versus if I'm a peer talking to a peer about something versus if I'm someone talking to the person I report to? Is there a difference in the way that conversation plays out, or is it the same basic things?
Yes and no. I mean, I
Mhm.
think at its core, radical candor is about caring personally and challenging directly at the same time. Love and truth at the same
Right.
time. And in theory, neither love nor truth obey hierarchy, you know? These are sort of but as a practical matter, it feels different. I mean, I also, this is about a book about humanity, and and I would
Right.
be ignoring the truth about humanity if I were to say, "Oh, it should feel exactly the same to speak truth to power as it does to speak truth to someone over whom you have power, to speak truth to your peers." And I think that very often different people have different levels of comfort. I actually am most comfortable being radically candid with my bosses, with people who have more. In
Mhm.
fact, maybe I sometimes am obnoxiously aggressive with them because I feel so deep in my bones that it's important to speak truth to power. But other people say that they're much more afraid to be radically candid, to challenge their direct reports directly because they're afraid they're gonna quit, and
Right.
that's also a real thing. And other people feel like it's not their job to be radically candid with their peers. But I would argue with your peers, and also, by the way, this works really well with you at home as well. With your peers, that's all you have. You can't hire your peers, you can't fire your peers, you can't decide what performance rating you're gonna give your peers. All you have is communication in order to work better with your peers. So you better be soliciting feedback and knowing what they think. You wanna express gratitude and appreciation. You wanna give them praise that's specific and sincere. And when they do something that bothers you, you wanna tell them, you know?
What are a couple tips you've got? I know the people should actually. I love the course. The master class is the one that I
Oh,
watched. I
good.
thought
Yeah,
I thought it
it
was.
was so fun making that.
Oh, it's outstanding. But the other courses that you offer are pretty similar. Some of our team
Yes.
watch both, but so there's a lot more for people to learn. But if you're going to say, well, here's where you start and being more candid, what's your suggestions on how to get
Yes.
started?
So the best place to start is by soliciting feedback. So
Okay.
you want people to be candid with you. Don't dish
Right.
it out before you prove you can take it. And there's four things to keep in mind when you're soliciting feedback. The first is that you want to be aware of how you ask. Because if you say, "Do you have any feedback for me?" you're wasting your breath. I can already
Right.
tell you the answer. "Oh no, everything's fine." So you wanna make sure that you are asking in a way that kind of demands an answer, that maybe puts someone even on the spot a little bit. A question that I like to ask is, "What could I do or stop doing that would make it easier to work with me?" But don't
Right.
write down my question, because if you sound like Kim Scott and not like yourself, people won't believe that you really want the answer. So
Right.
and if folks listening can actually, as long as you're not driving, pause, pick up a pen, and write down their question. So a good question, a good way to ask for feedback. Ask a question that can't be answered with a yes or a no.
Mm.
So if you read the book, you'll notice that I said, is there anything I could do or stop doing? And, if you write a book about feedback, you're going to get a lot of it. And indeed, I did. A lot of people pointed out it would be better to say, what could I do? Not, is there anything? The second thing is that it's got to sound like you. So for example, when I was working with Krista Quarles, who was the CEO of Open Tables, she said, Kim, I could never imagine your words coming out of my mouth. She said, the way I like to ask is, tell me why I'm wrong. Okay, that's fine. But the third rule of asking for feedback is that you've got to pay attention to the impact that the way you ask has on others. So there were a couple of people on Krista's team who found her question too aggressive. And so for them, she had to back off a little bit. So think about your go-to question and then ask it. Now, the second thing to keep in mind when soliciting feedback is that no matter how good your question is, the other person still doesn't want to answer it. Nobody wants to give you feedback except teenage children, if you have those. And if you teach those, this is a service they will offer you. And it's really important I have twins who are 16. So it's the house of radical candor where I live. So anyway, you want to make sure that you close your mouth and count to 6. Like that's what I call embrace the discomfort. It is so uncomfortable, that silence, but the only way out is through. And if you can remain silent for 6 seconds, the other person will probably tell you something. The next step, I think, the third step, is to make sure that once the person does say something, you're listening with the intent to understand, not to respond.
Right.
Because even though you just solicited, and you're really soliciting criticism, you're not fishing for compliments here. And even though you just solicited criticism, when you get it, you're likely to feel a little bit defensive. And that's okay. That doesn't mean you're shut down to feedback. It just means you're human. And luckily, your humanity is all part of this. So you want to think about, how can I manage my own defensiveness when somebody says something? Simple tactic here is to ask a follow-up question. And make sure you're not asking it in a sarcastic way.
Right.
But for example, my daughter, when she was younger, said one morning to me, Mom, I wish you weren't the radical candor lady. And immediately this wave of parental guilt washed over me. And I thought, oh, I'm spending too much time at work. And then I started to feel defensive. And I was sort of thinking, well, how does she think I'm supposed to earn a living? And then I decided, well, I should take some of my own advice here. So I said, well, who do you wish I were? And she looked at me and she said, I wish you were the lady who minded her own business. So I could spend a little more time at work as far as she was concerned.
Right.
So I think that is really helpful in terms of making sure that you're really listening with the intent to understand. You're not trying to defend yourself. This is almost like a mind reading skill. You're not always going to hear things you want to hear. But then the fourth step, and when it comes to soliciting feedback, is to reward the candor. It's never enough to say thank you for the feedback. What you want to do, if you agree with the feedback, is fix the problem and then say, did I overcorrect? Did I undercorrect? Ask for feedback on your fix. If you disagree with the feedback, though, now you're kind of in a tricky situation. It's easy to feel wedged because you just solicited feedback and now you have to have a disagreement with this person. And that can feel defensive. The way to manage this is to think hard about what the person said and identify the 5 or 10% of what they said that you can agree with. And give voice to that, just to make your listening tangible. And then you got to have the disagreement. It's easy to feel like a disagreement is risky for relationships, but I think we all know that what really endangers a relationship is unspoken disagreement, because then things fester and blow up.
When I submit a book for publication, it goes out to reviewers, and so I've said to my acquisition editor, I said, send it out to people who don't like my work.
Yes, very
I
wise.
said, because the people who like my work are just going to tell me nice things.
Yeah.
And then they send it back. Then they send back their feedback. I get the feedback. And I call up my editor and I say, "Who are these idiots that reviewed my book? This is so much crap." And I'm mad for about a week,
Yeah.
and then
Yeah.
I go, "But wait a minute, there are some real golden things in here." And so what I like about your process is you build in a delay in the way you respond. And I think being, even though when you hear it, your first reaction might be, do they have any idea what I'm trying to deal with when they complain about this piddly or whatever it might be? Because actually, give it a week, and that feedback could be really helpful. So I think building in that delay and taking it in and acknowledging the person and letting them know, and then acting in ways that show that it landed, I think those are really, really powerful things.
Yeah, and of course, with feedback, you've gotta separate the wheat from the chaff. There you will get some feedback that's off base and not helpful, and just wrong, just flat wrong. So you don't have to act on in fact, you shouldn't act on all the feedback. There was one CEO I was coaching, and he was getting some feedback from his team, and we were discussing it, and he looked at me and he said, "I reject that feedback." And, I mean, I was his coach, he was allowed to say that to me, and then we talked it through how he was gonna explain to his team that he heard what they were saying, and, there were a couple of aspects of it he could agree with, and then the part he disagreed with, it's like, a math problem. You wanna show your work,
Right.
and then you can have a reasoned discussion about whether you're right or wrong.
I was having a conversation with a friend of mine last night, and he asked to give some tough feedback. So I said to him, "You should read Radical Candor." I really, he was like, he wrote it down. But he said, "My challenge is I don't know how much of the problem I've created and how much of it is his problem." And then other people have said, "I feel a lot of imposter syndrome, and that interferes with my ability to feel firm about what I say." So have you got, I don't know, this is kind of a complex thing, but if you're feeling like an imposter, or if you're not 100% sure how much the problem you created and they created, which I think is often the case with difficult situations, there's something I'm probably not doing here. How do we negotiate that kind of messy situation?
Yeah. I think the first thing to realize is that that level of uncertainty is an asset, not a liability. Because radical candor, it's a conversation, and you should be humble in the way that you're giving the feedback. And if you're 100% sure you're right, you're much more likely to make a hash of it than if you're like, "Well, maybe I contributed to this situation." So if you're worried that you contributed, just say that. Like, that's why it's great to start by soliciting feedback. It's a conversation, not a monologue. And if you're not sure you're right, which you may not be, I think it's important to remember that even if you're wrong, feedback is still a gift, because if you're right, it's clear why it's a gift. You're letting someone know about a mistake that they're making in time for them to fix it. So in the case of Bob, he needed to know that he needed to fix his sloppy mistakes and be in a frame of mind where he could fix his sloppy mistakes. But sometimes you're going to be wrong. But even if you're wrong, it is still a gift to share the feedback, because only if you tell the person what you think will the person know what you think and have an opportunity to change what you think. And so there's something that is sort of important and humble about giving feedback and being unsure whether you're right or wrong about it.
So I just interviewed Maggie Jackson, who's the author of the book Uncertain. And what she said was the most productive leaders are the uncertain leaders.
Yes.
They're the ones who bull forward with a bold plan that everybody has to follow, don't get a whole lot of crap done. The ones who say, let's do some experiments and learn here, are the ones who have the most to share.
100%. Yeah, yeah, it's so true. And I think that you know, when you become a leader, people want you to be certain.
Right.
And you don't wanna give in to that. People are gonna demand that you be certain, and that is dangerous. There was when I was doing research for Radical Respect, there was a great article about BS, and it that they sent a survey out, and they asked people if they knew about various mathematical principles, and one of
Right.
them was not really a thing. They had made it up.
Right.
And, the people who were most sure that they knew all about this made up topic were, so they're BSing. What they were people who had more power in some
Mm.
dimension or another. And so this is another thing to be aware of when you become a leader. People won't challenge you if you sound sure. And often you become a leader because you sound sure. One of the things I had to learn when I got hired at Google, I had a HR business partner who came to me and said, "Kim, you're shutting people down and you're intimidating." And I sort of felt like I'd been struggling to be taken seriously my whole career. Like, when was the week that I became intimidating? And of course, it was because I was managing a team of 700 people, not necessarily because of anything I did, but that was no excuse. And so I was skeptical. And this person said, "Go into your next staff meeting and tell people to do something that you know to be impossible. And if nobody pushes back, you know you have a problem and you've got to fix it." And I did as suggested, certain that everybody would say, "Oh, Kim, that's a bunch of nonsense." And nobody did. And then I realized I need to seem a lot more uncertain than even I feel.
It's really wonderful how you put together humanity and clarity, and the two go together. And to have the hard conversations, if you want to put it that way, or at least to have the conversations about what matters, there needs to be a relationship there. And so, from my perspective, one of your key themes is caring for yourself,
Yeah.
caring for others. So, could you share a bit about caring, both for the other person and for yourself?
Yeah. I mean, one of the things that I learned that was super important for me to do, not only for myself, but for my team, is to figure out what I needed to do every day I needed enough sleep. I spent so long in my career feeling guilty if I was going to sleep on, which is ridiculous. So I needed to turn that guilt on its head and feel guilty if I didn't go to sleep on. Because if I didn't go to sleep on time, I was going to be snappish. I was going to be mean.
Right.
I needed to exercise outside. Even if it was raining, I just needed to be outside for an hour a day. And I need to have a meal with someone who I love. And if I can do those 3 things every day, no matter how chaotic things are, I'm gonna be more or less okay. And if I don't do those things, even if my life is at a super easy phase, then I'm not gonna be. I'm gonna be stressed out and anxious. And so taking care of yourself is really important. And then taking care of others is also really important, and realizing that caring personally can be the work of a moment. I think a lot of people feel like they have to wait for years before they can be, and then you get what I call, I'm here in Silicon Valley, so we talk a lot about tech debt. And technical debt is what happens when you're not fixing bugs in your software, and then pretty soon the whole thing is just unusable. It crashes. I say in relationships, we often have feedback debt.
Mm.
And that can be almost impossible to come out from under. So you want to, as soon as you're getting to know someone, be radically candid. And if you think about a simple example like spinach in your teeth, even if you're having lunch with someone for the very first time, if they have spinach in their teeth, the thing to do to build a better relationship is to tell them.
Hmm.
Because if you don't tell them, they're gonna go to the bathroom after and think, "Gosh, why didn't Kim tell me? She doesn't have my back. I'm about to go into this big meeting, and she didn't bother giving me a heads up." You know that about spinach in their teeth. It's true about all kinds of more complicated work issues as well. And I think the other mistake that people make about radical candor and particularly about the care personally part of radical candor is that they feel like it has to take forever. Like, I got an email from a journalist who said, "How long do these radical candor therapy sessions have to take?" And the answer is, you know, less than 2 minutes. In fact, the origin story of radical candor for me started in the space of time it took a light to change on the streets of Manhattan. I had just gotten a puppy, loved this dog, loved her so much. I had never said a cross word to her. As a result, she's totally out of control, jumping all over the place. And a speeding cab almost hit her. I pulled her out of the way in the nick of time. I was standing on the street corner with my heart in my throat. And this man, a perfect stranger, looked at me and he said, "I can tell you love that dog." That was all he had to do to move up on the care personally dimension. He didn't need to know my children's names or remember my birthday or take me out to lunch. He just had to notice my humanity in the moment. "But," he said to me, "you're gonna kill that dog if you don't teach her to sit." And this is the challenge directly point. And then he pointed at the ground with this kind of harsh gesture and he said, "Sit." The dog sat. I had no idea she even knew what that meant. And I kind of looked up at him in amazement and he said, "It's not mean, it's clear." And then the light changed and he walked off, leaving me with words to live by. So that's it. It's caring and challenging at the same time. That is what is truly kind.
I love it. I love it. I think I'm going to be a better parent, a better husband, and a better leader just with this conversation. In radical respect, you talk about the importance of something a lot of us talk about, bias and becoming aware of our bias.
Yes.
But the question I have about that is, it's kind of like the air we breathe. Because we're living the biases, we're not aware of them. How can we become aware of the biases that might interfere with our capacity to be a just person, but also
Yeah.
effective? We may
Yeah.
not see the gifts and talents of other people because
We're
we
missing.
just don't see it. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think one thing a bunch of teams I've worked with on this have found helpful is to be more specific about because bias means a lot of different things to a lot of different people.
Right.
So if it's helpful, you can call it unintended offense, you know? And none of us want to, well, I guess there are people who do intend to offend, but none of your listeners intentionally offend others. So this is something we know we need to avoid. And for me, what's really helpful is to create an environment on a team where it's expected that we will disrupt bias in the moment. And so I recommend sitting down with the people who you work most closely with and saying, "Look, we all have these unconscious biases. We don't mean it. We don't mean any harm, and yet we're doing harm with these unconscious biases. And the only way to fix it is if we point them out to each other. And we don't have to be aware. I think sometimes people feel discouraged because they feel like they have to be aware in every conversation of every single possible unconscious bias that they might have. And like you can't possibly so let's give ourselves extend some grace to ourselves first and foremost and to others and just try to become aware of the biases that are getting in the way of how we work with specific people. So one leader I worked with sat down with his team and he said, "Everyone has a red word." And by that, I mean a word that if someone else uses it, you're not going to hear another thing that's said for the next 15 minutes. So that kind of communication is inefficient. And if we are aware of each other's red words and we avoid them, then we're going to work together better. And so that's one way to approach it. I like to do something maybe even a little bit more dramatic, which is to sit down with your team and to say, "Okay, there's going to be, we can talk about red words, but there's going to be new stuff that comes up. We're going to bring someone new on or whatever. And so what is the word or phrase that we will use in order to point bias out in the moment?" And it's important to do this in public. And this is not, to me, this is not public criticism. It's a correction, and that needs to happen because bias is a thought pattern, and if we don't correct it publicly in the moment, then we're gonna do it again. The bad pattern gets reinforced instead of changed. And so with my team, somewhere on my desk, I have a purple flag. We wave a purple flag. But talk to your team and figure out what's the word or phrase that people will use. There's one team I worked with who would say "ouch" when and that gave the person who said the bias thing the opportunity just to say "oops." So you're moving past the moment. You're not ignoring the moment, but you're also not getting stuck in the moment. You're moving past, you're disrupting it and moving. You want to disrupt the bias, not the whole meeting. There was another team I worked with, and they had kind of a cat theme going on, and they would meow at each other. So whatever it is, like, use the talk to your team and figure out what's a word or phrase they'll use to disrupt bias, And then you also need to talk to your team and say, how how can we plan to respond when we're the one whose bias has been disrupted? Because we all have biases, and we all feel defensive when our biases are pointed out to us, and again, that doesn't mean you're shut down to feedback, it means you're human. So how can we, engage our humanity to move through these moments when we're the one who has said or done the biased thing? And I recommend just teaching people to say either, always thank you for pointing it out. And then one of two things: either I get it and I'm going to work on not doing it again. But it probably will be hard because it can take time to change these ingrained patterns of speech or
Thinking.
thought. Yeah.
Yeah.
And or thank you for pointing it out, but I don't know what I did wrong. And that's hard to say. Like now I'm doubly ashamed. I'm ashamed because I hurt someone and I'm ashamed because I'm ignorant. I don't even know what I did wrong. And if we can learn how to be humble enough to admit that and to educate each other, then we can approach this with agency and grace.
I have so many other questions. How do you do this with teams that when you're communicating virtually, and a million other things about it? But I want to end with one question, which is about trust. I think everybody who's listening to this podcast recognizes not much happens without trust. If you don't
Yes.
have a, if people don't trust you, they're going to have a hard time hearing what you have to say. So what can we do to foster trust?
Yeah. The seeds of trust and the seeds of psychological safety, I believe, are actually sown in soliciting radical candor.
Mm.
That's why I think, especially if you're a leader of some sort, if you can start by soliciting radical candor and then rewarding the candor when you get it, that's the most important thing you can do to build trust in a culture of psychological safety. Amy Edmondson, who is at Harvard Business School, who did a lot of the research on psychological safety, and I wrote an article about like the most important thing you can do to begin to earn trust and build that kind of psychological safety on your team is to follow those 4 steps in soliciting feedback. What's your go-to question? Then you've got to embrace the discomfort. Then you've got to listen with the intent to understand, not reply. And then you got to reward the candor.
Is there anything else you'd like to share to educators, or just something I've overlooked that we really should make a point of discussing?
I really just want to extend a huge debt of gratitude to all the educators out there. My children have been so lucky to have so many wonderful educators in their lives, and I was so lucky to have so many educators in my life. And one of my novels is called The Measurement Problem. And that's about it's a novel about I mean, this doesn't sound like a novel. It really is explored in a love triangle. But the theme is that capitalism is really good at rewarding what we can measure, but it's really bad at rewarding what we value. And the main example in the book is that bond traders get paid more than teachers. Teachers need not only gratitude and appreciation, but they need better pay.
Yeah, no doubt about it. Well, look, I'm glad for your gratitude for teachers, but I want you to know you've made a huge difference on us and helped us do what we do. You're our little hero when it comes to candor. Well, though in talking to you, I know I've got a lot more work to do, so I'm grateful. But I'm grateful for the chance to learn with you. TLC, you're gonna love the experience. They're gonna love having you there. I can't wait to see you in Phoenix.
Well, I know I will learn a lot from everyone. So come with your radical candor hat on and tell me how to teach this better.
I don't know if they'll wave red flags or purple flags, but there'll be enthusiasm and they'll be learning. Thanks so much, Kim. What a pleasure. I'm grateful. So grateful.
Thank you. I'm grateful too. I really enjoyed the conversation.